Jesus Freak here, and I'm sorry you're not going to see this in action. There's no batteries. Anyway, a couple days ago and last night, a friend of mine was looking through a used video game store, and he asked me if there was anything I was interested in. Turned out that 2 of the 3 games I had for my original Game Boy, this is a Game Boy Pocket. As you can tell, it's a lot smaller than the original Game Boy, but plays exactly the same. So he's going to try to get me those. See, I lost my original Game Boy and the 3 games I had for it in a basement flood as a result of really bad weather about 20 years ago. It turns out that the 4 games that I've acquired since, none of them did I have back then. Which is kind of interesting because almost everyone who ever got a Game Boy, they got it with Tetris. If this cartridge looks a bit unusual, as does the Super Mario Land, they're Japanese cartridges. They're import carts. They didn't have to localize them because there's no Japanese in them. I'm like, well, the opportunity fell into my lap. I wasn't actively seeking any of it out. Almost as if it were meant to be. See, the original Game Boy, and I owned one of their original models, which I called the Brick. I got one in 1994, I believe it was, as a Christmas gift. Could have been 93, but I think it was 94. And I got Mortal Kombat 2 at that same time, so that would probably give away the more precise time period we're talking. Later I got Mortal Kombat 3 and Star Wars, so those are the games I originally had. See, it was like, well, what do you want that's not going to be too expensive? I was given the opportunity back in 94 or whenever it was. I took it. I basically opted for, and this was my thing at the time. I opted for the cheapest way of getting Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat 2 was my favorite game at the time. Now, it turns out that the Game Boy versions of Mortal Kombat 1, 3, and 4 were terrible. But 2 was actually decent. It was missing about a third of the game, but it still had it still felt like Mortal Kombat and still played like Mortal Kombat. And that's what I wanted at the time. And eventually, now I've forgotten a lot of that I used to know, but I've managed to, I got everything in that game. I managed to get to Jade. I managed to get to Smoke. I beat the game with every single character. You know what you do with boredom, right? But it was a little bit of enjoyment. People talk about violent video games and make a kid violent. I grew up on Mortal Kombat, Wolfenstein 3D, Samurai Showdown. These are all bloody video games. I mean, they're nothing like some of the stuff you see now. But in those days, it was oh my heavens, this is terrible. Really graphic stuff for the time. I mean, well, Samurai Showdown wasn't as known for its violence, even though, you could cause someone to spurt blood out of their aorta when you finished them off. I mean, it was every bit as violent as Mortal Kombat, but you didn't hear about it so much, probably because it was, not as popular as Mortal Kombat. If something becomes popular, it draws the attention. And Mortal Kombat drew attention. Sure, everyone knew you could rip someone's heart out in Mortal Kombat. Not too many people made a fuss about the fact you could cut someone in half in Samurai Showdown. And that's the kind of stuff I played back then. But I was like, I don't see violent video games as something that's going to induce violence in a kid. It's if they're already predisposed to being violent, then that's what they're going to do. But for other people, it might be like, well, I feel like beating someone up. I'm going to take my super out and I'm going to play a few rounds of Mortal Kombat. Take out my aggression by beating up a person on a computer. And I did that well into my 20s. If I felt the need for violence, I'd turn on one of those bloody video games. That's what I did. Instead of taking out my aggression on someone else, I get out of Mortal Kombat and grab the person, beat him up, and take my mask off and burn him to a crisp. Because that's how I rolled. It wasn't to induce me to violence, it was to induce me away from violence. It was a tension release. I got that same feel from holding down and pressing high punch on the controller, whether it be the Genesis controller, the Super Nintendo controller, Game Boy controller. I played Mortal Kombat 2 on all of those, and I played them in the arcade too. I got the same feel out of that I would have gotten out of really punching someone's lights out. It was a substitute. It worked. Now, I know the plural of anecdote isn't data, but that's just my personal experience. Jesus, freak out.